Riebeeck can be seen as the father of the nation, and he's been targeted for a lot of hostility. Now, the first person to literally and figuratively plant the cross in the Cape of Good Hope was Bartholomew Diaz. Now, he's Roman Catholic, of course, from Portugal. And fortunately, Bartholomew Diaz and Vasco da Gama, who followed him afterwards, did not settle here. They were from Catholic Portugal, and they were looking for a way to the east, but they came past the Cape during our winter, so they saw storms and found this to be a very unpleasant area, and so they called the Cape of Storms, which was later renamed the Cape of Good Hope, which is much better for tourism, far more optimistic and positive. But Bartholomew Diaz, while he planted the cross and claimed southern part of Africa for Christendom, which is what they called Europe at that stage, by God's grace, God preserved the south of Africa for the Protestants to settle. And so we do acknowledge Bartholomew Diaz's contribution here. In the foreshore, there's a monument to Bartholomew Diaz close to the Cape Town International Conference Center. And Bartholomew Diaz did plant the cross, the first Christian to settle or to stand here in the Cape and to pray that this area would be used for the gospel. But of course, his allegiance was primarily to the Pope. Vasco da Gama later came and went all the way around the Cape, and he's the one who named False Bay False Bay. Not that False Bay is a false bay, it's a true bay, but it was a false hope. They came to the edge of Cape Point and they turned around and thought, we've got to the tip of Africa, now we're on our way up to India. And then, oh no, it's a bay that's come out, so they called it False Bay. I've always thought it's a bad name for a bay. I mean, imagine having a degree from False Bay College and so on. It just, the name false and something just doesn't seem right. Nevertheless, Vasco da Gama, when he sighted another piece of beautiful green land, he named it Natal, because he spotted on Christmas Day, so hence of the Nativity, Natal. Interesting, the Zulu means heaven. KwaZulu is the kingdom of heaven, or the place of heaven. The Zulu language, isiZulu, is the language of heaven. So you've got KwaZulu Natal, we've got the idea of heaven and the nativity combined in the name of one province, which is interesting. Vasco da Gama went all the way up to India, and so he was the one who opened the sea route. They had to get a sea route to India because of the Muslim Middle East being dominated by jihadists who were very hostile to Christianity, and so the land route to China and Asia, which Marco Polo and others had used, was being closed. They had to find a way around Africa and around the Middle East. Obviously, there was no Suez Canal yet, so going around the Cape was key. However, because the Cape of Storms was so inhospitable, they decided they're not going to settle in the southernmost point of Africa. They thought Mozambique and Angola far more friendly climates, and we're glad for that, because otherwise, could you imagine, southernmost points of Africa could be like Brazil, one big Catholic area, whereas what you got was the Catholics took Mozambique and Angola, Portuguese East Africa, Portuguese West Africa, and the Protestants got Southern Africa, which is so much better. The gospel would not be advanced as it is now if the Catholics had got here first. So you could just see providential history there. And now we are talking about Jan van Riebeeck. Johann Anton Isroen van Riebeeck, born 21st of April, 1619 in Kallenberg in Netherlands. He is the son of a surgeon, and he followed his father's footsteps. He was traveling far and wide with his father, and he became a surgeon himself. He grew up in Schiedam, where he married 19-year-old Maria de Aquila, 28th of March in 1649. Jan and Maria van Riebeeck had 8 children. Obviously, they were pro-life. And one of their sons, Abraham van Riebeeck, who was born in Cape Town, later became the Governor General of the Dutch East Indies. And here's a painting of Abraham van Riebeeck. At the age of 20, Jan van Riebeeck joined the Verenigde Oost-Indische Company, or VOC, or Dutch East India Company. He served as a surgeon in Batavia in the East Indies. And he is also head of the VOC trading post in Tonkin, what is today Vietnam. Remember the Gulf of Tonkin incident, was a false flag operation Americans organized in the Gulf of Tonkin to start the war with Vietnam on a totally false basis. They claimed that their battleships were attacked by some torpedo boats from North Vietnam. It must have been the bravest or stupidest torpedo boat commanders possible to attack the US Pacific Fleet, but it was found out later nothing happened. It's a total lie. It was just organized by Lyndon Johnson's government to justify getting involved in the war in Vietnam. So Tonkin, just the link, Gulf of Tonkin, that's where the false flag operations started. The Vietnam War began. And then he later served in Japan. But Jan van Riebeeck proposed the selling of animal hides from South Africa to Japan because he had to stop at the Cape, one of the few places they could stop and get fresh water for their ships. Of course, they were also concerned about scurvy, not getting enough vegetables and fresh meat. And so he proposed the idea to establish a Dutch settlement at what became known as Cape Town, at the Cape of Good Hope. And we live at the southernmost points of Africa, or at least habitation-wise. We know there's still Cape Agulhas, but nevertheless, for most people, this is the southernmost habitation, at least. He landed 3 ships, the Dromedaris, the Riebeeck, and the Good Hope in Table Bay, and he built the Fort of Good Hope as a halfway house, as a supply station, Tavern of the Seas, for VOC vessels traveling between Europe and the East Indies. I think people need to remember that the Cape was not a Dutch colony. It was a colony of the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. It was a company running it, just like a lot of America's wars overseas these days are run by companies like BlackRock and so on. And this was quite open. The Dutch East India Company had colonies, they had governors, they had armies, they had navies, and it wasn't the Dutch people or the Dutch government, the Dutch country doing this, it was a Dutch East India Company. It's like, just think of Anglo-American and De Beers sending out their own private army, the British South Africa Police, to establish a colony in what became known as Southern Rhodesia and today Zimbabwe, and later Northern Rhodesia. It was a company that ran it, the British South Africa Company. And Rhodesia was never a British colony. It was a self-running, self-sustaining, self-supporting colony run by the British South Africa Company, which was part of De Beers and Anglo-American. So we've got other examples as too. So it's not that we were ever a Dutch colony, we were a Dutch East India Company colony. First act of Jan van Riebeeck upon landing in Table Bay on the 6th of April, 1652, was to pray this prayer. And it's actually quite an impressive prayer. O gracious and most merciful God and Heavenly Father, in your divine majesty, you have saved us and called us to guide the affairs of the Dutch East India Company in this place. And to this end, we are gathered here together in your name. May the decisions we take further maintain justice, and amongst these wild and uncivilized people, may your true and perfect Christian teachings be established and spread, to the honor and praise of your holy name, and the prosperity of our Almighty God, without whose merciful help we are powerless. Therefore, we pray to you, most merciful Father, and ask you that you will stand by and support us with your fatherly wisdom and understanding, and preside over our gatherings. Lift our hearts that all wrong passions, misunderstanding, and bestial lusts be removed from us, and cleanse our hearts. So fix our minds that in our actions no other principles or motives are apparent, other than the magnification and honor of your most holy name, so that we may best serve our Lord and Master, without in any way acting for our own advantage, or taking into account personal gain, to which end we will carry out our orders and so earn a worthy blessing. We pray and ask this in the name of your beloved Son, our Master and Savior, Jesus Christ, who taught us to pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, and he prayed the Lord's Prayer. This is a good beginning to this settlement here at the Cape. And so right from the beginning, he's praying that the light of the faith would spread throughout the dark continent to all the tribes in Africa. And it's not that the Cape was very well occupied, but there were bushmen here. Now, there used to be bushmen stretching all the way from Kenya up in the north, all the way down to South Africa. But we've seen the bushmen's paintings in the rocks and caves, but no bushmen survived there, because as the Bantu, as the Nguni peoples moved down, they exterminated the bushmen. And the only place in the world where bushmen survive is in the Western Cape and in Namibia. because they were protected here by the Dutch settlers from the hunting of the Xhosa and other tribes that came here who were treating them like animals to be killed for sport. And so the Bushmen, whenever there was a battle between the Xhosa and the Eastern Cape, the frontier wars they call them, the Bushmen and the Hottentots always took the side of the settlers because they knew they're the only thing that are keeping us from getting exterminated, as they were everywhere else. So that's interesting. The Bushmen were a nomadic people and they hunted with little bows and arrows. The Hottentots were a very short, yellowish people. The Hottentots, now called Khoisan, they were pastoral. They had cattle and goats, and they would also be very nomadic. So the outpost established in Table Bay by Jan van Riebeeck initially consists of just 82 men and 8 women, 90 people in total. During the first winter at the Cape, 19 people died in the harsh environment. Cape Town would be very harsh. If you didn't have these sort of buildings, you can imagine they've come off ships. And now the Cape winter, the Cape storms coming. Just think of the rains we've had the last few weeks. And they're building temporary shelters, and you can imagine how cold and miserable that must have been. Well, within a few months of arriving in the Cape in 1652, war broke out between the Dutch Republic and England, a naval war, a very unnecessary war. Most wars are unnecessary ones, sadly. It was just about mercantile concerns. It was basically rival merchant navies wanting to muscle in on one another's business. And so England got involved in this horrible war with the Dutch. At that moment, General Cromwell was not Lord Protector yet. He was out fighting the Irish who were persecuting Protestants in Ireland. And so when he came back into England from Ireland, he marched his soldiers into Parliament and told them, cease and desist, stop this insanity. Protestants should not be fighting Protestants. The Netherlanders, the Dutch, they are our cousins. We should not be fighting them. And this is madness. So he expelled a whole lot of the Presbyterians out of Parliament who were behind a lot of this war. And he decided, no, we're going to have he had a leaner Parliament because of the insanity of the war party. And I think you can see there'd be quite a case today for somebody like Cromwell to walk into the US Congress and say, enough of these sort of stupid wars. You know, we're not going to fight this and that. Let's bring about peace. In fact, it would be quite nice if some of these congressmen declaring the wars were sent to the front. Let them experience what they are sending other people to do. But sadly, you can see a lot of what's happened in the world today is we're going back to private companies controlling the wars. And this war was because of two rival companies, the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company, wanting a war and conscripting their country's navy to do their dirty work for them. And there's a lot of predictions in the military that wars are going to go back to being privatized. More and more, you can see this being done by America. They're hiring a lot of South Africans as military contractors, and they have got other foreigners out there, basically mercenaries, doing their wars for them. And this works out for the politicians because it's not their men dying, it's foreigners, so you don't need to tally them amongst our people who've died. And you don't need to train them, they're already trained. And it works out actually cheaper for some governments to have private armies run by massive corporations like BlackRock in America or Executive Outcomes from South Africa. And so this isn't that strange. We even have this happening today, that you have private wars. And so the Royal Navy and the Dutch Navy were busy fighting over mercantile markets and so on. So the completion of a fort became urgent, and Fort de Goede Hoop was hastily built of mud, clay and timber in the middle of what today is Adderley Street. So the Fort of Good Hope is to be distinguished from the Castle of Good Hope. The Fort of Good Hope was built of mud and clay and wood, nothing like our stone castle that we've got now. And our stone castle today is a 5-pointed star, whereas the Fort of Good Hope was just a 4-pointed star. These bastions are important for overlap. So if somebody's trying to climb the wall of a rival bastion, people from the other side can cover them. If one bastion's knocked out, artillery from any of the others can overlap. So it's very well designed according to the needs of that time. The Castle of Good Hope is now over here to the left of the harbour. the Fort of Good Hope's roughly where Adley Street is today. As you can see from an early picture, of course, the coast used to come right up to the castle walls, but being Dutch, they had to reclaim land. Even though you had the whole of Africa there, you can go to the foreshore, and when you go to the castle, you've got to remember everything between the castle and the ocean used to be Table Bay and the harbour. And now it's foreshore, solid. Who knows how many millions of tons of rock and soil they moved into there to reclaim that land. So right from the beginning, Jan van Riebeeck tried to have good relations with the indigenous people, who, by the way, notice they weren't black people. The Hottentots and the Khoisan, more yellowish, more aboriginal, a lot shorter than the Nguni, Bantu people. And the black people don't regard the Bushmen and the Khoisan as black people. And they never have, and that's why they've always fought against them. And they've never been allies in any of the wars. But the first black people to get into the Cape came about the time of the French Revolution, late 1700s, at the Fish River, which is about 800 and something kilometers from Cape Town. And so this propaganda that the whites invaded, took over the land of the black people, and we've been living under 350 years of apartheid, that's ahistoric, mindless drivel. Anyone who says that obviously doesn't know history or geography. So these are some of the people who controlled the Cape. Batavia was one of the great settlements of the Dutch East India Company in Indonesia. And so Cape Town was the tavern of the seas. This was super important for the Dutch, and they were so seeing it so strategic that they put quite a lot of money into helping to develop the Cape. And Jan van Riebeeck and the people who came here had to be supplied with fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, meat, fresh water, so the sailors would be healthier going all the way to India and back. Some interesting artwork. I think the person who sketched this was doing it from memory, because that doesn't look very accurate at all. And he's made it easier, put his sails in the way so that you didn't have to draw Devil's Peak. But having climbed Lion's Head many a time, it's not that high. And Signal Hill isn't that high either. But I think this artist was using his memory. Here again, it's like Lion's Head's as big as Devil's Peak, and Devil's Peak's not as big and tall as Table Mountain, which isn't accurate. But many of these pictures, I'm sure, were done from memory, rather than, well, it's not like you could exactly sit out in Table Bay and sketch it. So there must have been, that's why these pictures are so inaccurate. But these are some of the classic pictures. There's the castle right close to the waterline. And the way how Cape Town initially developed. Interestingly, Table Bay wasn't deep enough, so they had to build out so that some of the later ships could fit in, because it was too close to the shore. Now, for 10 years, Jan van Riebeeck served as commander of the Cape from 1652 to 1662. He planted vegetable and fruit gardens, of course, in what today is called the Gardens. It's called the Gardens because those were the company gardens. There's only a few of them left right now in what is still called the Gardens downtown. He also imported livestock to provide fresh stocks of fruit, vegetables, meat, milk to the vessels passing by the Cape. And he tried some things that didn't work, like planting wheat and rice, which were abject failures, but this is the wrong climate for that. How was he to know? No, this is all new to everyone. Many of the innovations that Jan van Riebeeck brought changed the natural environment of the Cape forever. He imported grapes, cereals, groundnuts, potatoes, apples, citrus trees, many of which now are part of our landscape. There was virtually no trees or forests when he arrived. If you wanted wood, you'd have to go to Hout Bay. It's called Hout Bay because that's where you'd find forests. There's not much forest left in Hout Bay now, but they planted millions of other trees over the years in the Cape, changing the whole ecosystem. And interestingly, originally, the Dutch built a whole bunch of canals as well. Being Dutch, they thought the best way to transport anything is by barges on canals. So like Bree Street and so on used to be a canal. And that's interesting. They had to build in a defensive way with a defensive hedge, because they saw pretty quickly that the local people had no shame stealing from them. In fact, the Hottentots and Bushmen were brazen about even grabbing brass buttons off children's clothes and running away with it and hunting their domestic animals. And so the hedge was to keep the people out who were wanting to steal their cattle and sheep and goats and so on. Here you can actually see some of the canals in downtown Cape Town. Some of the gardens still exist past where, behind what's St. George's Cathedral today. And of course we've got Parliament on this side, but there's still some of the gardens visible, whereas that whole area was vegetable gardens. In Kirstenbosch, the National Botanical Gardens that Cecil Rhodes donated to the Cape, you can still see some of the wild almond trees that Jan van Riebeeck planted. And you can see Jan van Riebeeck's hedge, or at least part of it, in Kirstenbosch. So when you go there next, just look it out. And this hedge was pretty effective at keeping the cattle in and keeping the potential cattle rustlers out. And some lovely places in Kirstenbosch Gardens where you can see the almond trees. Still today, it reminds you of what Martin Luther said. If I knew Jesus was coming back tomorrow, I'd plant an apple tree today. The idea of, plan for the future. Let him find us busy, productive, occupying. It's a wonderful thing to plant trees. And I think of my home, we moved in, there was only 2 tall pine trees in the garden, nothing else. And now we've got so many trees, all planted by my wife over the years. And you can just see how it's growing. You think that was so small, and just giving it water and a little bit of nourishment here and there. And after 20 odd years, you can see, goodness me, what a beautiful, wonderful heritage left behind. Nursery buttress, Kirstenbosch Gardens, the Strelitzia, which was the symbol of my unit, 6th South African Infantry. Well, Jan van Riebeeck's diary shows a keen eye for the environment, for natural resources. He had an understanding of the culture of the Bushmen, who were hunters, and the Khoi, what were then called the Hottentots, who were the herdsmen in the area. And on the 17th of December, 1652, Jan van Riebeeck reported the first comet sighting from South Africa. Shortly after being relocated to the Dutch East Indies, his wife Maria died in Malacca, which is now part of Malaysia, on the 2nd of November 1664. Now Maria was only 35 years old, but she had 8 children. Jan van Riebeeck died in 1677 in Batavia, what is now called Jakarta, on the island of Java, part of Indonesia. Which is intriguing because, in the place of Batavia, because you might recall a few years ago, the ANC had their 103rd birthday in the Greenpoint Stadium, and they had a bunch of witch doctors there casting spells to cast out the spirit of Jan van Riebeeck. Now, I don't know how you can cast out the spirit of Jan van Riebeeck because he's not even buried in the Cape. He's buried out there in Indonesia. But nevertheless, in this place that was then called Batavia, the spirit of Jan van Riebeeck is probably Christianity, is probably what the ANC is objecting to, because Jan van Riebeeck's a convenient scapegoat. He's blamed for anything wrong in the country by the government that for 30 years has been looting it and wrecking everything. And it's convenient to have somebody to blame. It's all Jan van Riebeeck's fault. So a man who was here 350 years ago is to blame for the mess that the present government's done the last 30 years. How convenient is that? Nothing's my fault, it's all someone else's fault. Someone who's not even alive now, and who wasn't even buried here. And you've got to get witch doctors to cast out a spirit. Well, I don't think that's going to work. So you can see the Dutch East Indies built castles all over the place, fairly similar to what you got in the Cape. That was the technology of the time. Our castle is the symbol for our Air Force, that particular 5-pointed star, those bastions, and it was the best technology of the time to combat the kind of weaponry they had. So very, very thick walls, very thick bastions. You could pound away with cannon all day. You wouldn't make too much of an impression on it. It's very, very solid. Rock exterior, some solid earth in between. Buildings built on the inside of the walls, but the walls are super thick. You're not going to get through that wall with the technology and the cannon that they had at that time. And each bastion overlooks fields of fire of the other bastions. So that is our main castle today. The original entrance used to be on this wall, but the ocean lapped against it, and the water was coming straight through often and filling the courtyard. So they closed up that gate and opened this gate where today we go in, which didn't face the ocean. Now, the image of Jan van Riebeeck appeared on the stamps and currency throughout my childhood. That's the kind of money we used, and those are the kind of stamps we used. And by the way, a 1 rand note was pretty effective. You could buy a lot of things with a 1 rand note. My pocket money was 50 cents, and with 50 cents you could do a lot. You'd be horrified to know how prices have risen. So, for example, a cinema ticket could be 25 cents. An Airfix box of either tanks or model aircraft would be about 45 cents. And, the little paint tins would be about 5 cents each color. And you could get 4 chappies for 1 cent. So, I mean, this is real money here. And unlike ours today, where you can pay 10 or 20 rand for parking. Unbelievable. So this is the old Cape Town crest, but notice right in the middle is the Jan van Riebeeck family crest. The coat of arms of the city of Cape Town is based on the Van Riebeeck family coat of arms, which has the 3 circles on a shield. I remember in 1977, the year I moved here from Rhodesia, and we were celebrating 325 years since the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck, and the 6th of April was a public holiday in the whole country. Postage stamps, I remember my first mailing for Frontline Fellowship was a 4-cent stamp. And today it's more like 4.50 or so for a single stamp, or it's probably a lot more than that for a single envelope. But now the post office doesn't work, thanks to the ANC, which is the middle letters of cancer. Notice the middle letter of cancer is ANC. But yet 2 cents used to be enough for a letter going around the country, but that's before our mission was founded 42 years ago. And there was a time that 1 cent stamp would have got your letters around the country. And so these are just different post stamps of commemorations. You can see how Jan van Riebeeck and his wife Maria were very much honored. Again, when we had 1 cent stamps, that's a long time ago. And again, you can see the VOC symbols on the stamps. Maria, interesting enough, Maria de Quilla is the first French Huguenot to come to the Cape. 10 shillings, reminding us there was a time South Africa wasn't using the pound, we were using the rand, we were using the pounds and shillings. And you'd actually have shillings as paper notes, not just as coins. And the £5 note was the biggest currency at one time. 1 rand. You can see how money deteriorated, that a 50 rand note couldn't buy what a 1 rand note could buy when I was growing up. And you can see the evolution. We went from Jan van Riebeeck symbol to a lion. And again, the coins. You've got here, remembering for the South African Navy, commemorating the first ships that came here under Jan van Riebeeck. And there was a South African ship named after Maria van Riebeeck, actually South African submarine, SAS, Maria van Riebeeck. Jan van Riebeeck and Maria de Quilla commemorated the coin. These are the kind of coins I grew up using. Notice the 2 sparrows on a 1 cent coin. Well, originally it was 2 sparrows on a ½ cent coin. You could buy a lot with a ½ cent. Even when I was a child, ½ cents were common. Now you don't even use the 1 cent coins that much. And unity is strength. Eindracht maakt macht on our coins, Springbok on the other side. Springbok and Jan van Riebeeck were associated with South Africa for many, many years. And again, you've got commemorative coins, 1652, and the VOC, some of the medals. This is for the tercentenary. At the 300th year anniversary of the founding, before I was born. It would have been 1952 they were commemorating. And again, different commemoration coins over the years for the tercentenary. So towns like Riebeeck Kasteel and Riebeeck West, and schools like Hoërskool Jan van Riebeeck downtown, they're named after the founding father of South Africa. Just look how unbuilt up the Cape foreshore was when they put up Jan van Riebeeck's monument. At the 300th anniversary, the tercentenary of the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck, Van Riebeeck Day was declared a public holiday. 6th of April every year was a public holiday from 1952. And they even, for the tercentenary, brought a boat that was something of a replica of the original dromedaris, and marching through Adderley Street with the Dutch East India Company flag, and that was called Founders' Day later. And we celebrated that as a national holiday till 1994, when we got a whole lot of new public holidays like Workers' Day, Youth Day, Women's Day, Freedom Day. Not that I think they know what that is, but still, what you call freedom. So this used to be the foreshore, and the wife of the governor, Maria de la Colliere, is the first French Huguenot to have moved to South Africa. So even before 1688 and the revocation of the Edict of Nantes and the Huguenots coming to what today is called Franschhoek, what then was called Olifantshoek, born the daughter of Abraham de la Colliere and Maria du Bois. Maria was described as energetic, thoughtful, a hostess, gifted, diplomatic. She is well respected and very much liked in the Cape Colony. There's a statue of Maria van Riebeeck on the foreshore on Adderley Street in Cape Town. You can see how it's built up. Maria and Jan van Riebeeck. A bit of social distancing going on there, but I don't think they went a lot for this American business of being arm in arm and all a hugging business back then. So we've got the foreshore. All this is, of course, reclaimed land. And the South African Navy named one of the submarines SAS Maria van Riebeeck in honor of her as the mother of the nation. And this submarine saw some very honored service during the war, especially deploying and receiving reconnaissance commando people on the coast of Mozambique and Angola. They went very high up, and it was also a major deterrent against the Cubans and the Soviets, whose warships were around our coast at that time. The Maria van Riebeeck, coins in commemoration, and of course you've got the Van Riebeeck shield with 3 circles as part of that ship's identification. And then Jan van Riebeeck, you can see that the statue was once pretty lonely out there on the foreshore after they had reclaimed the land, but they hadn't built it up yet. And so originally it looked somewhat like this, and then more and more buildings coming up at the foreshore, Cape Town International Conference Centre being built up behind there. And today, very established. I think he would be most surprised at how this little outpost has grown over the years. You just think how small the original colony was, settlement here. And today, pretty impressive. So this is the first chapter of Sketches from South African History book that I put together. As a homeschool father of 4 children with 2 daughters, 2 sons, we homeschooled for years, and I got very unimpressed with the history books. I found the history books were so liberal, and even Christian history books I found many cases were a little better than the same selection of stories and individuals and events as the secular books, but they might add a prayer or a scripture verse. And it was, in fact, so many errors. I would be regularly pulling out my pen and correcting things in a textbook that we got from America, these textbooks. And my oldest daughter, Andrea, had no problem with her dad correcting the textbook, but my second daughter was horrified. Dad, how could a textbook be wrong? And I'd say, well, governments make mistakes all the time, and government-appointed committees to produce some of these textbooks don't know what they're writing about. So next question, well, Dad, how do you know you're right? Which is a good question. How do you know? I said, well, I was brought up in Rhodesia. I knew Ian Smith. I've met P.W. Botha. We were friends with P.W. Botha's daughter, good friends with his bodyguard and his son-in-law, Skalk Vaskalki. We helped produce his book as well. I've been to many of these places. I've met people like Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, been imprisoned in Lusaka Central. I know these countries from personal travel. Jonas Savimbi was someone we worked with, we know him. And so, because of my travels in 42 countries and worked in 38 countries, I know some things to be true or not from first-hand eyewitnesses. My dad was in the 8th Army in the Second World War, all 6 years the war fought as a bombardier, and I've got first-hand experience from many soldiers who fought in different wars, people in the Eastern Front, people in the Western Front, people in North Africa. My Old Testament survey professor at college was Dr. Fritz House. He served in Africa Corps. He is actually in Erwin Rommel's headquarters, and he ran a Bible study throughout the whole war, which included Erwin Rommel attending his Bible study. So, you know, by God's grace, I've met some people that are part of history, and I can know some of these things just aren't true at all. And I've met Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, people who've been key in our history, and so I felt that I can sometimes correct, especially when you know the dates wrong, and something that's just mindless garbage that's been put in history books. So after a while, I was encouraged by my wife to produce a book on South African history, which is what this is. And the Afrikaans version, Sketche uit die Suid-Afrikaanse Geskiedenis, is better because that includes chapters also from Stephen Mitford Goodson, who was once director of the South African Reserve Bank, and Koen Elgin, who's an author who's done some great books, had him do things on a great trek and so on. So the Afrikaans edition is bigger and better than even the English edition, which was first. And we've produced audiovisuals as well. It's so important that we know our history. We've got audiovisual box sets here. And there's a whole lot of other history we've added. Koen Elgin's books like Bulala, Stephen Mitford Goodson's books on Jan Smuts and Henrik Verwoerd. I've brought some history books here for anyone to look at during tea time as well. Are there any questions at all on Jan van Riebeeck? The castle. It's well worth visiting. How many people here have been to the castle and explored it? I do guided tours of the castle every now and then, and sometimes I've been there and had a whole bunch of tourists join as we walk around the castle, and I noticed one of them had the tour guide's badge and flag, and at the end this person came up to me and said, "How do you know these things? I've studied for this and I never knew any of this." And where did you train to be a tour guide? And, well, I didn't train to be a tour guide, but I read books, and I was stationed at the castle when I was in the army for a while. It used to be the Western Cape Command's headquarters, and so actually had an office here and was involved in some of the activities in military intelligence on call-ups. So I know the castle personally. Interestingly, if you look here, Leerdam is the tallest. That was the first bastion built, and it was tallest. They used to have all the different flags here that had flown over the castle. Well, almost all, not the French flag though, but the Dutch and the British and of course the old South African flag. This is the highest, and when people were hung, they'd be hung on Leerdam, and people would gather in what's called the Grand Parade to watch. The public hangings used to be done, and this is called Die Kat, where a proclamation was made for the governor and so on. And interesting, this Katzen Ellenbogen is where they had the prison. And so, for example, famously, King Keshweo was imprisoned there. The British, after defeating the Zulu in the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, had ordered a Commandant, Charles Gordon, who was the Commandant of the Cape at that time, to throw King Keshweo into the dungeons, which he wouldn't do. General Charles Gordon was a very dedicated evangelical Christian. He was a rebel. He didn't regard orders as something to follow. He regarded them as a suggestion. And so General Charles Gordon was very unpopular with the people of the Cape because he took the Boer side in the Anglo-Boer War, the first Anglo-Boer War of 1880. He took the Zulu side in the Anglo-Zulu War. He said, they were minding their own business, we're the aggressors, and that was considered treason amongst the people who were British at the time. But he took things from a Christian perspective. So King Keshweo, he had his people salute him, present arms, honored him as a king, and he was allowed free reign of the castle. They didn't lock him up. And he also got gospel booklets translated to Zulu. He explained the gospel through an interpreter into Zulu with King Keshweo, prayed with him, and organized for Keshweo to sail to England to meet with Queen Victoria, who gave him back his kingdom. So there's Charles Gordon doing a lot of good things. Charles Gordon did a lot of good. He, for example, when Commandant of the Cape, also organized for a whole lot of gospel literature to be printed in Dutch to get to the God-fearing Boers. And he said they were people after his own heart, God-fearing, courageous, principled. And Cecil Rhodes, at that time a newcomer, said that Charles Gordon was a very strange man, totally disinterested in money, which meant he didn't have a price. You couldn't buy him. And everyone else seemed to have a price, but not Charles Gordon. Well, Charles Gordon was kicked out of the Cape, and when he was kicked out of the Cape, you know where he went? Up to Palestine, which then was under the Turkish Empire. And reading his Bible, he undertook archaeological research around Jerusalem, and he ended up, from Bible study and archaeological research, identifying what was known for years as the Gordon tomb, or the Garden tomb. It obviously wasn't Gordon's tomb, it's a tomb of Christ, but it was found by General Charles Gordon. So if you go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, how many people have gone to Jerusalem before? Okay, when you go there, the Catholics have their place where they believe Jesus was crucified and buried, and but they didn't do archaeological research or Bible study. They got a monk had a vision and said this is where it was, and then they built a massive edifice over it and put all kinds of ornaments on top of it. Whereas General Gordon studied the Bible, prayed, and looked carefully at the evidence, and he identified what Protestants go to as the Garden tomb, which looks just right. And then close to that is what was called Gordon's Calvary, which General Gordon identified this is the Calvary where Jesus was crucified, and it actually looks like the place of a skull, Golgotha. And the Catholics have got another place they go to, which was identified by a monk who had a vision. So we can be very grateful, just like God providentially left the Cape open for the Protestants to settle. He also protected the actual sites of where Christ was crucified and where he rose from dead, so that we can go there without having to go through a whole superstitious edifice that's been built up by people over the centuries, which the Catholic and Orthodox go to. So I think that's just interesting to know something about General Gordon's involvement in the Cape. And so we've got the moat, and interesting enough, when the British took the Cape, they filled the moat in. And a friend of mine, Commandant Cochrane, when he became Commandant of the Cape, he, from 1980 on, dug out the moat that had been turned into a rubbish dump over the years, and returned it to its natural previous moat that covered all around the castle. And the lions at the entranceway, some of the ancient cannon being used here, and the gate to the castle, which has got the different shields of the companies in the Netherlands that made up the VOC. And this is the way it used to be. The flags of Netherlands, the old United Kingdom, which just had the Union Jack of Scotland and England, before they put in the Welsh St. Patrick's, I should say the Irish St. Patrick's Cross in. It just said St. George's Cross of England and the St. Andrew's Cross of Scotland. That was before the first settlement, first occupation of Cape. Then the Dutch under the Batavians came in. Now they had red, white and blue, not orange, white and blue. And then the Union Jack again, and then the Oranje Blanje Blauw of South African Republic before the beach town. But somebody decided to take them down because they said you can't have a apartheid flag up there. But of course, the Oranje Blanje Blauw was raised in 1927, long before apartheid. Nothing to do with apartheid. Oranje Blanje Blauw was historically the Union of South Africa. And pity they've taken away the history, because this is a historical monument, to have the ancient flags there is just historical. But now, unfortunately, they've taken it away and they only have the beach towel being displayed. But it is one of the great monuments. It's the oldest building in the Southern Hemisphere still in operation. They started to build it in 1666, 2nd of January. And a lot of the stone was quarried out of Robben Island. Now, when you go to Robben Island, people will show you that quarry and say Nelson Mandela worked at this quarry, which isn't possible. This quarry hasn't been used since the 1700s. But, you know, who wants facts to get in the way of a good story? This used to be the entrance to the castle, now just a wall painting, but that was the original gate, and the water came all the way through. So then they had to build the new entrance, which is so much better. You don't want to run your shoulder against this gate. That's a pretty intimidating gate. And so they've got the construction of what it used to look like, not just the castle, but the outer ravelin, where you've got your outer defenses. If an enemy attacked, they'd have to get over this wall, then they were in a killing zone, lower than the main walls. So the castle was never taken in battle, nor could it. With the technology at that time, this was unassailable. a mighty fortress indeed. Nassau, Oranje, Leerdam, Katzler, Ellenbroek, and the flags of our history. So any questions, comments, complaints, criticisms? Interestingly, this was something that Commandant Cochrane discussed when we were restoring the castle in 1980. Should we take down Neptune and Poseidon, Neptune statue Poseidon, because those are pagan Greek gods, idols. But this is part of the history. So these Dutch Reformed Christians who built the castle, because we were at the Tavern of the Seas, had some of the ancient Greek mythology into it too. Neptune and Poseidon meant to control the seas, and here we were controlling the two oceans, the gateway to the east. And so they've got some of the banners and flags and ivory and different spices and things like that from the east with the helmet. So it's just part of the history. It was decided to leave it as it was because it's history, even though we don't like it. I mean, we don't like pagan Greek gods whatsoever. But here's where the announcements are made. If you've seen some old South African films, you'll see frequently they're using this. In fact, even in the Crown series, Queen Elizabeth came in here and had the castle decked out, pretending that she was in Ghana. But many Anglo-Boer War type films, like the one film you might recall, if you've ever seen it, is That Englishwoman on Emily Hobhouse. And they've got Lord Milner and Lord Kitchener standing on there making some declaration during the Anglo-Boer War. It's quite a few films have been made here because the castle is an old building. It's one of the oldest buildings in the Southern Hemisphere. If you've seen, for example, King Solomon's Mines, the one that was made in about 2005, using the treatise from Cheetah Outreach. In it, they did a lot of the harbour scenes and so on were done inside the castle because there's so many nice nooks and crannies and alleyways which they made into Middle Eastern marketplaces. So it's a very nice place to come and for film shoots. And these are some of the ceremonial guard that they have for the tourists these days. That's the Commandant's office. I've been marched up there on orders to see the Commandant, but that's where General Charles Gordon had his office as a commander of the Cape. And up there is the Harbour Master's office. And when you're up there, you've got the best view of the harbour, and it was the highest point in Cape Town for years. The Harbour Master could see which ships in the harbour, who had paid their taxes and duties and who hadn't. And you've got the officers' mess to the right, and the governor stayed in this building decut on the left. This beautiful lawn died during the so-called drought of 8 years ago when the city decided to stop watering lawns under their responsibility. Sad, because it used to be a beautiful lawn, and I don't think the moat looks anything this nice and clean anymore, sadly. They need to restore it in many different ways. But this is where the water used to lap against, and that's where the original entrance was. Many people don't know there's a nice parking place at the back, which is where I always park, but most people don't know about it. On the far side, behind, you go into that street, across the bridge, past the moat. That's the best parking area, and much better than the Grand Parade. There's a memorial made of wood from Delville Wood, First World War. Delville Wood, South African 1st Infantry Division marched in there as part of the Battle of the Somme, and it became a salient. A salient is where you're surrounded by the enemy on three sides. So South African Division did their duty, took Delville Wood, but the French and British on the other sides didn't do their part, and they were exposed to enemy fire from three sides, and we lost virtually everybody in the 1st South African Division. 2,600 went in, something like 200 came out. And so they brought some of the Delville wood and built the cross in memory at the castle. Going up Plattekloof Gorge to the top of Table Mountain, the first recorded picnic on Table Mountain was by Lady Anne Barnard. And she went up with a whole lot of servants, had picnic baskets, had a full-on multi-course meal on top of Table Mountain. So the first picnic, and they went up Cliff Gorge. Any other questions or comments? I can go straight into President Paul Kruger, unless you've got questions. But before I do that, I've got to stop the recording